The caller reported that she heard that female screaming, "Get off me, get away from me, I don't want to be with you anymore."
A teenager getting ready to go to her 8th grade graduation was instead found shot to death. Now her much older boyfriend is under arrest. We're taking a closer look at this case with criminal law attorney Melba Pearson. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. Have you experienced severe gastroparesis or other side effects after taking Ozempic or another GLP-1 weight loss medication? The Ozempic lawsuits allege that the drug can lead to severe intestinal blockage and persistent vomiting, and that manufacturers allegedly failed to provide adequate warnings about these risks. Well, TrueLaw, one of our legal sponsors, is helping those injured file a claim through an experienced attorney who helps ensure your claim is thoroughly presented. Visit glp1case.com/sidebar to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. Friday, June 14th was supposed to be a happy day for 15-year-old Aliana Dickey. That was the day she was going to be attending her middle school graduation ceremony. But she didn't show up. No. Her grandmother went to look for her at her home in Lowell, Massachusetts, and what did she find? Aliana in a bedroom with multiple gunshot wounds, apparently to her neck and torso. By Monday, police had identified and arrested their suspect, 21-year-old Trevor Beatty. Now, this is really, really twisted, so stay with me here. According to the Middlesex County District Attorney, despite Aliana having just turned 15 in April, the two had been dating.
Later investigation determined that Aliana had been the victim of abuse from 21-year-old Mr. Beatty, who had been a boyfriend for some period of time. It was learned that Aliana had confided in a number of people that Mr. Beatty had been abusing her and was threatening her as recently as the middle of last week. The Lowell police had received a call around midnight on Thursday night into Friday from an individual who reported that they heard a male and a female fighting outside on the street. The caller reported that she heard that female screaming, "Get off me, get away from me, I don't want to be with you anymore." That caller further reported that they had heard gunshots.
And we'll get into that a little bit more, but apparently that's not the only evidence investigators have. No, the assistant DA also said there is surveillance video allegedly showing Aliana running to her home Friday morning with Beatty following her. 8 gunshots were then heard on the video, and then minutes later, Beatty is seen again alone running. Law enforcement, they end up tracking him down to this residence. He had allegedly been planning to stay at a motel, but left, went to this building, this residence. They track him to the building where they reportedly find him trying to escape through a back window. So they apprehend him, they take him into custody. And also it was the way that Beatty allegedly moved from one place to another that was interesting as well.
Police later learned that on June 15th, the defendant allegedly took an Uber to the home of Ms. Dickey on Lawrence Street, and shortly afterwards, he reached the same Uber and took that Uber away from the Lawrence Street area. The driver of that Uber later reported to police that he was concerned by the behavior of that passenger, and he later was able to identify that individual as Mr. Beatty.
And the prosecutor also said that the Uber driver told them that Beatty looked sweaty and nervous and made comments about, quote, being set up and that he wasn't the one who fired the gun. He reportedly used his sweatshirt to open the car door and asked the Uber driver to wipe down the handle after he left. Now that Uber apparently dropped him off at this home of his new girlfriend in New Hampshire. Beatty was arraigned on Tuesday. He was held without bail. He is charged with murder, home invasion, 3 gun crimes. Not guilty pleas were entered on his behalf, and he's next scheduled to be in court for a preliminary hearing at the end of July. To talk about this more, I want to bring in Melba Pearson, criminal law attorney, one of my favorites. Love seeing her. Melba, what a case here. What are just your initial thoughts on hearing this?
So always great to be with you, Jesse, and my heart is utterly broken. I am a former domestic homicide prosecutor. So unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with these types of cases, and I can't even imagine what her family is experiencing right now. Her friends, everyone that was in her graduating class that was looking forward to starting high school with her. She had her whole life ahead of her. But at the same token, I have to highlight the fact that domestic violence, domestic abuse is something that is, number one, affects people from all socioeconomic backgrounds, from all races, genders, creeds, everything. No one is immune to that. The U.S. Department of Justice says that just about 1 in 5 students in high school experience sexual and physical violence in their relationship in the last 12 months. So literally, in the last 12 months, 1 out of 5 high school students experienced sexual or physical violence in their relationships. Mm-hmm. If you drop it down to more stalking and harassing, it gets to almost 50%. So our kids are experiencing this at huge rates. And we as parents, as aunties, as relatives, as just people in the community need to be more vigilant, because this is happening literally in front of us. And we cannot continue to keep losing our kids to this horrible scourge of domestic violence. So my heart just breaks for the family and for the community. And I very much hope that justice will prevail in this case. But it seems like the prosecution has a very strong case to move forward with.
That is such a disturbing statistic. I didn't even know about that. And look, from a legal point of view, right, they still have to make the case. He's innocent until proven guilty. But tying into what you just said, the Middlesex Assistant DA, District Attorney, Christopher Tarrant, he said, quote, Aliana had informed others that Beatty had been hitting her, giving her bruises and a bloody lip. Family members described seeing bruises on Aliana's legs, knees, and arms as recently as June 13, 2024. On June 12, 2024, Aliana confided in one person that this defendant made statements such as, I am going to kill you, I'm going to kill your grandma, and that he was going to shoot up her house, and then he threatened to kidnap her and shoot her. So when you hear statements like this, allegedly being made by the defendant and allegedly being recounted by the victim here, someone could look at that and say, and if he really did it, how is this not prevented? How did no one step in?
There are so many layers to this. There's so many layers to this. What disturbs me here particularly is the fact that she told people and no one seemed to have intervened. Because many times someone who is suffering in a domestic violence relationship won't tell anyone. Or they may tell that one friend and try to downplay what is happening. But this is an instance where this young lady, this child basically, is telling so many people that, you know, her boyfriend was abusing her. There's evidence of the bruises, of the pain she was going through. My question is, how come law enforcement wasn't called earlier? My question is, why wasn't a restraining order sought in this case? Now, we do know one of the most dangerous times for anyone in a domestic violence relationship is the time that they try and leave. Unfortunately, that seems to be the case in this instant fact pattern, where she was basically screaming, I don't want to be with you anymore. And his response, sum and substance, ended up being gunshots. But at the same token, there are things that the family could have done in order to protect her. I'm not blaming the family. I'm just asking the question if they just weren't aware of the resources that were available. Was there no place to maybe relocate her temporarily out of town as they try and pursue legal action against this person? Because the threats alone is enough. And of course, we also can't forget the statutory aspect of this. Him being 21 and her being 15, most states that's illegal.
Yeah.
In terms of, especially if they're having an intimate relationship. So, and I would assume, again, not knowing all the facts, but I would assume in this type of relationship and the amount of control he was exerting over her, that there was an intimate, a sexual component to this relationship. So that too is a crime. And that could have at least gotten him arrested and separated from her until the family could have made some other arrangements to get her to safety. Again, not blaming the family.
I understand.
Looking for answers as to, because I think there were a lot of missed opportunities here. And again, I'm wondering if it was just a lack of understanding of the resources and the different ways that they could have protected this poor child.
And look, we'll get more information as this case progresses, trying to understand the dynamic between the two. But in terms of the evidence against him, I laid out a lot of it, right? You know, how they tracked him down, the alleged surveillance footage, the eyewitness account, or what somebody, a caller, had heard, the screaming. It feels like, you said, a lot of evidence. How do you poke holes in it? I mean, if you listen to the Uber driver, right, and you take it as face value, was Beatty saying, I didn't really do this, I didn't pull the trigger, kind of weird things to be saying in an Uber, allegedly being saying in an Uber, but then allegedly wiping it down and didn't want his fingerprints there. How, as a defense attorney, would you poke holes in all these different pieces of evidence at this point?
There's no poking holes. There's begging for a plea. That's what the defense attorney needs to do. There's no poking holes in this. Even if you wanted to go down the avenue of a mental health defense or saying that, heat of passion, they were arguing, he didn't know what he was doing. Well, his actions after the murder shows consciousness of guilt. He's fleeing. He's talking about it. He's taking precautions by trying to remove evidence in the form of fingerprints, and I definitely need to give kudos to the Uber driver who realized that something is not right here. I mean, it's very easy for people to say, it's not my business, I'm not going to pay attention and just drop this person off and go on to the next ride. But his behavior, the defendant's behavior, was so shocking to this Uber driver that he took it to the next step. And that was another way that assured the defendant being arrested, and now the wheels of justice can begin. So I don't think there's a mental health defense that he can use effectively. And again, it's going to be very hard to say it wasn't me because of the domestic violence nature.
I didn't mention one other aspect. So apparently, at one point, I believe it was on that Saturday night, a detective ended up speaking with this defendant over the phone, and he allegedly claimed that he wasn't in Lowell, Massachusetts over the last 2 weeks. So again, allegedly not being 100% transparent to law enforcement, which we call that, what do we call that? Consciousness of guilt, or we call that, allegedly lying to law enforcement is not great.
Yeah, not at all. And the reality is, Uber has a record of where they picked you up and where they dropped you off. So I'm not quite sure how he thought saying that was going to somehow help his case, because again, the Uber driver can testify. Not only does the Uber driver can testify, you have the records from Uber. It's literally in your app as to where you were picked up, the route you take.
Surveillance footage is like the worst spot. I mean, if that's really accurately portrays as what law enforcement is saying or authorities are saying, it's really bad. I do have a question for you, though. So the Boston Globe, they're reporting that Beatty has been arrested at least twice over the last few years. So putting aside all the other allegations about the problems in their relationship, in 2021, he was allegedly involved in an incident where teenagers beat, kicked, and robbed another teen. Then he was arrested a few months later in 2022 when he allegedly fired a gunshot in the direction of some man. Both cases were dismissed for, quote, lack of prosecution. Now, it could be that some of the witnesses didn't show up. I believe I read that. What does that mean, lack of prosecution?
So lack of prosecution usually means that the case can't go forward due to a lack of evidence or due to a lack of victim or witness participation. Now, for instance, in the context of the robbery, you have the victim who was robbed and beaten and had their injuries, but they also may be thinking about the broader calculus of things like, I got to go back to school with these people. I live in the neighborhood with these people. So if I testify against them, I have nowhere to go, and they may come back and harm me and my family. So there's that fear aspect, because remember, people think, oh yeah, you can relocate witnesses. That's the feds. And that's if you're testifying against El Chapo. Most people don't get that witness relocation on a day-to-day basis for these types of, and I don't want to trivialize, but just, these lower level cases. And I say lower level meaning it's not, you're going after a gang, you're going after the mob or something along those lines.
Sure.
These regular sort of everyday cases that we see on the news generally don't lead to witness relocation. So witnesses and victims, sadly, have to think about their own safety and figure out whether it's worth it to move forward. Same thing with the gentleman that may have gotten, shot at. He may have, number one, maybe had trouble identifying who did it. Or again, number two, he got shot at once. He's saying, thank my stars, I got home safely. You know what? If I leave well enough alone, they won't come back and look for me. So that witness intimidation aspect, even though they may not necessarily be knocking on the witness or the victim's door per se, that fear that they carry is real. And it's something that as a prosecutor, you have to deal with, and you have to try and, relieve their fears in order for them to get to the point to get to the witness stand and testify.
But going back to Aliana for a moment and to wrap this up. So Aliana's parents, they started a GoFundMe in her memory, which has raised more than $13,000. So if you want to contribute, please do, to help support in any which way. Her father, Scott Dickey, wrote, quote, unfortunately, we have faced the worst fear in our lives. One of our children was brutally taken from us, our beautiful daughter, Aliana Dickey, only 15 years old, a beautiful young lady who has the most beautiful soul. I can't believe we have to stomach this and bring our minds to write something like this. Our family is hurting during this horrible tragedy. No parent should have to bury their kid, definitely not to a monster coward who took an innocent life. So, Melba, as we wrap this up, first, I want you to tell us, how does a family even move forward after this, particularly when now they have to deal with the legal case, right? Especially if he decides to fight this and take this to trial, and there's witness testimony and the medical examiner report. A trial is such a difficult experience for the victim's family. So how does a family move forward from this? And also, to wrap it back to what you said before, if people are in a situation like this, or suspect that somebody's in a situation like this, what are the resources that they can turn to?
Absolutely. So first, in centering the family and their pain right now, first of all, I do think they need to seek counseling, whether it be spiritual counseling, whether it be traditional therapy. But this is a horrible experience that they're going to need to process, and they're going to need professional assistance in doing so, because it's a lot. It's a lot to have to endure. Secondly, the other way they get through this is together as a family, together as a community, with everyone rallying around them and supporting them. The GoFundMe will be helpful in terms of burial expenses, but that will never bring their beloved daughter back. So that rallying and community support, I think, will help them during the process. And also, most prosecutors' offices do have victim witness counselors that sit with the family in court, help them understand the process of what's going on, and warn them, pace by pace, what is going to happen next. So that's where I think they're going to be able to get some assistance. However, a guilty verdict, if that is how this case ends, is not closure for them. They still will have to continue to move forward and work through that pain. And it takes a very long time, if ever, for a family to recover from this. So again, I hope they get the resources they need to be able to support them during this difficult time. For other families or, folks, all of us, right? We all have a responsibility. If we see something, say something. And in terms of getting resources, in terms of domestic violence, there's a wonderful organization called RAIN. There is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you are in a domestic violence relationship, please look at those resources, but be sure to do so in a safe manner. If you know that your abuser has access to your laptop, your phone, that sort of thing, use a friend's phone. Check at work, someplace where you can be safe and get the tools that you need to make yourself safe. Don't suffer in silence. There are people that will help you, and do not be afraid to leave your abuser, because there is life on the other side of abuse. I'm a survivor. Years ago, I went through it, and let me tell you, it took a while to put my life back together. But at the same token, once you know to get to those resources and you have that loving support of people around you, that will help you get to the other side of this. So my heart deeply goes out to the family. I know deeply what they are feeling. And again, I hope they get the support they need. And I hope that everyone watching knows to be able to learn about this and advocate for people who are currently going through a domestic violence situation.
Melba, that was incredibly well said. I hope people listen to what the message you just sent out. Thank you for sharing your experience as well. And as always, I love having you on. You provide incredible insight. This is the beginning of this case. We will see what comes out of it. These are allegations at this point, but as we talked about, the evidence is quite strong against this young man. Just a horrible, horrible, horribly tragic case. Melba Pearson, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on this episode of Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.